So, welcome to Classic DM. This is episode 1, The Abduction. So, theme. Before we get started, let's go over theme. Sit up next to the fire with me for a moment and let me tell you what this is all about. 1978. It's 40 years later. So, what do you say we revisit those classic first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons modules? You know, the ones we played when we were little kids. We're all grown up now, but it doesn't mean we're not a kid anymore. At my table, you'll find homemade tokens, a visceral story, plenty of hack and slash, all on the stage of some freehand architectural sketches with multimedia, imagery, snappy visual aids, and maybe a little touch of atmosphere and sound. The classic modules, the dungeons, the passageways of our childhood memories, they should live on forever. So in many ways, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to keep these magical memories alive from a time before the internet and smartphones and Amazon. So what better way to do that than film live episodes at a real gaming table? There's always a front seat right next to me, right next to the DM. After all, in many ways, you're the player. So hopefully living along with the characters on screen and questioning their every move, but hopefully pulling for them in the end, is a lot of fun. Maybe it brings you a little bit of nostalgia. Maybe you like to quote Gygax like an old school, or maybe you're the DM that knows the rules better than me. Either way, get involved and have fun. Sometimes it's just fun to daydream and think about it. But I tell you what, I'm glad you're here. So sit back and relax. Think about those days when the first edition first came out. It was 1978. And we're going to take you through one of the grandest campaigns that started all of RPG across the planet Earth. And here it is. Dungeon Module G1, Steading of the Hill Giant Chief. Now the word steading is an interesting one because if you look it up in the internet or on the web in a dictionary, it means kind of like a farmhold. But anyone who's ever played this classic, original, high-level campaign dungeon from the very beginning remembers that it is definitely a hack and slash, multi-drama, multi-level campaign that's been redone over and over and over. But we're going to go and play the very, very original. But I've changed the story because the original story was a little loose. Because these campaigns were first written for a DM like yourself or like me to kind of flush out all those little details and make it their own and own it. So I've done that. So let's get started and give you an idea of what we're talking about here. So as we all know, this infamous image here is of the exterior of the Hill Giant fortress nestled away and originally in the Hellfire Furnaces or the Crystal Mist Mountains or the Liberation of Jiff or all the other places they have in the world of Greyhawk. Before we get started any further, though, we need to understand where we are. Some of you have never been here. So this is the world of Greyhawk. Was created by Gary Gygax and TSR way back in 76 and 77. This is the western part of the world. And the Warper campaign is going to take place pretty much on this side of the map. Of course, there's an eastern side as well, and all kinds of fun stuff can happen there. But we're basically going to focus on this region here. Now, a long time ago, there was lots of migrations, and you can read in the Gazetteer of Greyhawk about all the different tribal groups that moved from the west towards the east, and the invoked desolation and the creation of the rain of colorless fire that destroyed one of the empires and turned it to the Sea of Dust. There's all kinds of really wonderful lore in there. But what we're going to do is we're going to focus in this northwestern corner here, which has primarily been settled by what they call Baklunish tribals. And in this area, let's just zoom in a little bit, we have one thing that I've always loved. It's the Tiger Nomads. Now, the Tiger Nomads are like a series of steppe roaming horsemen. You almost imagine something from a Genghis Khan era when you think about these folks. They're tribal. They live under a singular mythos based on the order of the world, animals, and the power of individual prowess. So if you're going to survive in that kind of culture, you're going to have to be good at what you do, and you're going to have meaning. These nomadic people have tamed this, have tan, deep reddish colors in their skin from sun exposure and a glare of endless overcast skies. A lot of romanticism you can kind of see when Gygax first created this. He was pulling from perhaps Tibet and Mongolia. So that's the Tiger Nomads. And some of our characters in our massive campaign come from here. In fact, 4 of them are siblings. Another kingdom that's really important is Ket. Now Ket's just down the other side of the Yato Mountains, a little bit further south. And it's ruled by the illustrious glory of Zoltan, the Bagrif of Ket, and the Shield of True Faith. Even with such a grand name as that, you think you're thinking of France during the Renaissance in the year 1515. Now, Ket has 2 major wall cities, and one of them, called the city of Mulvar, acts as a gateway for trade between all the eastern part of the continent, or the eastern Falané, and the world beyond. So as you can see off to the west, we have the plains and Tusmet and the Caliphate of Ekbir, almost like Middle Eastern influenced nations. And that's one thing about Gygax's original campaign that I always thought was really neat. It always had this real-time war game connectivity to history. There's a touch of Waterloo here and a touch of the Renaissance here, a Marignano there. So the little elements like this kind of come alive. So Ket utilizes honor, a strong military, and consistency to build diplomatic relations with their neighbors, even at great expense, and prosperity is their thematic mantra. So you can almost think of Middle Ages France, maybe young England, and things of that nature when you think of Ket. Another player in the whole story is placed off to the west of there, called Tusmet. And Tusmet's ruled by this exalted splendor, the Pasha of Tusmet, Jadim. What a glorified name that is. It almost reminds me of one of the characters in one of R.A. Salvatore's novels. So this region of the world is a little bit different. It's kind of stuck between this very noble area of Ket and the northern rampaging nomadic steppes of the Tiger Nomads with this monstrous mountain chain in between it. So they're kind of in between the gateway to the west and the gateway to the east with this small narrow passageway you see with the river running through it. So they've kind of made lucrative expenses and advancements on mining. So gold and silver is what they're all about. And the Pasha of Tusmet enjoys playing one nation off against another, utilizing inside information and spies, and in many instances blatant sabotage to ensure that Tusmet profits and others suffer. I guess in some ways you can almost think of OPEC. Now we know in the modern world it's not really like that, but if you go back and think about ancient history, parts of the Middle East are almost that way. They had something and other people wanted it, even if you see what happened after the end of World War II. So Tusmet and tension kind of go hand in hand. So these three major nations have major players in our story, and without a story, the whole reason for going to this entire campaign doesn't really have any significance. So why don't we just dig into a little bit more details here. If you're a player sitting at my table, these are the handouts I would give you. So Tusmet, and there was a period of time 20 years ago when the Archmages of Ket discovered an assassination plot against Zoltan. Now remember, Zoltan was the ruler of Ket. And they captured the 10 hired assassins who all hailed from the Caliphate of Ekbir, who you heard mentioned a moment ago, and their orders to make Zoltan's murder appear suicidal after the death of his own father. But upon interrogation and torture, the assassins admitted that the orders came from Jadim himself. And deeper investigations revealed that Jadim was under the influences of Zinzerena, a demigoddess of chaos and assassins of drow origin, which many people scoffed at and didn't think was actually true at the time. Although the details behind what would compel him to strike out against Zoltan and Ket kind of remained unknown. But Ket subsequently accused Jadim of his evil and was refuted, and he was banished, and rumor has it that he fell ill in a terminal disease and passed away some 2 years ago. So at this stage, Ket and Tusmet do not get along. The Tusman Hills ends up being a landscape for battles and skirmishes in between the two nations, while Ket's continue to pioneer trade past Movar through the mountains of Yatel to the kingdoms above in Pearland. But then we have something that happens that's kind of crazy. So there's a marriage, and a marriage, almost like in the Middle Ages, is one bit of bonding two families and bonding two nations together. So the young prince Aden, the Archmage Prince of Ket, and Mara, the Chakyik Princess of the Tiger Nomads, become betrothed and fall in love and get married. And this marriage stabilizes that whole northwestern region of Oerth, bonding those two nations and tribes and families together. So when their firstborn child vanishes, all the shamans and the priests scramble together and divine the name, and the name Zinzerena comes up again as a whisper on the night wind. With nothing left to do but reach out to more family, Mara reaches out to her family, her most powerful brothers and sisters, and Prince Aden does the same thing. This is not something that the Mare military can take care of. This is their firstborn child, one prophesied to be even a savior of the two nations. So 4 Baklunish siblings of Mara and 3 noble commanders from Ket, all siblings of Aden, join forces to find the child. So patrols scour the region looking for clues as to the child's abduction. A night patrol some 2 days later discovered a grisly scene in an obscure little canyon between the Tusmet Hills and the Yatel Mountains, right in this little hex right here. Now remember, in the world of Greyhawk, each one of these hexes is about 30 miles across. This is pretty far. Well, one night patrol discovers 2 days later a very grisly scene of an obscure canyon. An entire encampment of hill giants lay slain, far from where their normal raiding fortress sits. Amongst the corpses is a single dead drow elf, his head splattered beneath a boulder. Poor soul. Tucked inside his crushed chainmail jacket is a map on human skin to the hill giant fortress, as you see here on the map, deep buried inside the Yatel Mountains, one that no one even knew was even set up or built there. Including that is instructions to deliver the child, marked with the letter E. Around his neck hangs a black amulet bearing the insignia of the house, El Serve. Now, if you know your Greyhawk history and you know what's about to happen, I think you already know what's about to happen. But for those of you who don't know what's about to happen, let's go ahead and get started on our actual adventure. Well, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to assemble our heroes, and so let's meet them firsthand. From Ket, one of the first people we have is a level 12 fighter who's lawful neutral named Mercedes. She's a sibling of Aden, uses a two-handed weapon, always been strong, heavy plate mail wearer, relatively mild, middle-of-the-road stats, very straightforward, always been a soldier of honor. But at the same time, one of Mara's siblings is also a great fighter and a warrior. And that's where Zinzerena comes in. Zinzerena's a level 12 fighter from the Tiger Nomads, and he has kind of a Yeka dialect and Baklunish, and speaks rough Flané in common. But he wields a burning glaive of fire. So his banded mail of the Western Waste gives him a really good armor class. But this guy, just like with Mercedes, are going to be your two frontline fighters for the entire adventure. Now, Zinzerena isn't quite as smart as Mercedes, and she's a little bit faster on the whip. She has more tactics ability than him, but his raw rage will certainly come in power and come into handy when we need it. Another sibling of Mara is Eliphanisi. Now, Eliphanisi is a monk, and the monks of the Tiger Nomads are very, very literal to the cause. They don't wear any armor. They only use open hand or with a staff, and that is it. They only wear clothing. All their armor class and all their statistics, everything's come from their prowess and their ability. In many ways, they're like a true mixed martial artist. But as we know, a monk in Dungeons & Dragons in the first edition are oftentimes quite weak on the hit points. Even though the armor class is respectable, they require a lot of skill to play. Now, her direct damage output is going to be critical, but she's going to have to use her movement rate and other abilities to play smart. She's certainly not going to be rushing into battle headlong. Her older brother is Varinjar, and Varinjar is the epitome of murder and ruthlessness. He's a level 10 assassin with statistics you might want to see in a fighter or a paladin, except he's quite neutral. He doesn't worry about good and he doesn't worry about evil. He wields two shining black axes, and he has a number of thieving abilities that are extremely respectable. Other than that, he's relatively straightforward. High strength, fantastic dexterity, decent wisdom, decent charisma, constitution. When you want something blown and taken away really quickly from the shadows behind the smoking torches of the hallways of the hill giant, he's the man to get the job done. So Varinjar is going to be playing the primary thief in the campaign and uses assassin abilities as much as possible to take out targets very quietly. His sister is a druid, Felcherna. Felcherna is in love with wolves and horses and other animals of the steppes. As a druid, she's also a true neutral. She wields a moonlight scimitar and has a maple shield, and she believes in the gods and tries to guide her brother and sisters along that path. But all that mythology and everything is always anchored around nature and good and evil, but being neutral at heart. Now, Felcherna is a custodian of the wild and especially of animals, so this may be a problem for the more ruthless members of the party, so they may have to spat that out a little bit to figure out what the way to proceed is. But right now, the good thing is they're all bonded together at the hip, trying to save this abducted child, which in essence is their own sibling. Next, we have Antola. Antola is a highly regarded battle priest, a level 12 cleric from Ket. He's the older brother of Aden. So as a typical cleric, he's going to be heavily armored, uses a flail, lots of healing spells, sanctuary, dispel magic. His one job is to protect everyone. He won't be a frontline fighter. You won't see him run around casting harm and try to blow things up on his own. He's going to do everything he can to support the group, because the group is relatively weak on instantaneous healing power. There won't be a lot of potion chugging, and there won't be a lot of returning to camp and resting for weeks on end. The plan is to return this child quickly and with speed, so playing Antola is going to be very tricky as the only cleric in the entire party. His younger sister is Obscura. She's a level 11 illusionist, and one thing I always loved about the first edition is playing an illusionist is not easy. An illusionist is not like a mage tossing fireballs and tossing lightning bolt. She's going to have to take advantage of hypnotic patterns, invisibility, blindness, paralyzation, phantasmal killer, shadow monster. These are the spells that really require some creativity to play them. So why not have an assassin and an illusionist as opposed to a magic user and a thief? Let's keep things spiced up and keep things interesting. So every character has strengths and weaknesses. They don't have tons of magic items, but they have a sufficient, strong enough power, and I have enough experience, I think, as a player to pull this one off. You'll find that the tactics that we're going to use will be very tactical and very militaristic in nature, and use quiet and speed and not frontal assaults a lot. So let's start talking about these characters in a little bit more detail, as in what they're going to do first. One of the first things we're going to do is get them all together. And what better place to do that than in Moldvar? So we're just going to remove this for a moment. So we have the princess, we have Aden, and then from Cat we have Mercedes, and Tola, as the oldest brother is always sitting at the head of the table, Obscura, the illusionist. And then we have 4 Baklunish tribals. Berenjar, the assassin. Zalaris, the warrior or fighter. Eliphanisi, the monk, the purist. And of course the druid, who doesn't mind sitting next to Obscura. And they all discuss what's going on here inside the castle. So with the information they have in hand about the Drow amulet, and they have the location of the hill giant fortress, the plan is set in motion, not to engage the military, but instead to send just the 7 of them together all the way up into the mountains itself and start trying to figure out what's happened. So all they can do so far is that the child was abducted by magical means. It seems like hill giants have been involved, perhaps with a drow party helping them, and they're moving the child towards this hill giant fortress that no one is really sure where it is until they've discovered this map itself. So one of the first things they're going to do is mobilize and get some horses together and travel to that region of the mountains, of the Yato Mountains. So let's go back and take a look at that, because our next episode is going to have our party arriving actually at the site and working their way into the complex. So as many of you know, these mountain ranges way up to the north like this, they can be fraught with bad weather and storms, rain, and snow, and it's not always peachy keen. But in many ways, when a rainstorm starts happening and the thunder starts to roll in across the landscape and the wind starts to howl, and you go in the middle of the night, what better way to sneak into the fortress? So one thing the party's going to try to do is work their way directly to the fortress and use a cave that's nearby to hide their horses and all their gear, which they can use as a base of operations. From there, they can work their way around the exterior perimeter of the fortress and figure out the best way to get in, using the druid abilities, using the assassin's hide in shadows, using magical means of invisibility, whatever is necessary. So that's our storyline, and on our next episode we're going to kick in the front door and see what happens. We hope you had fun with this first episode. If you have any feedback you'd like to leave, feel free to do so. This video will end up being on YouTube as an archive. It will also be part of an extensive posting I'll post on Patreon, which will explain a lot of the details about how I made the different types of counters and the map design and the glass and the lessons you learned about putting too much weight on glass when you're trying to draw on things. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope you've enjoyed this backstory. And I'll also reveal some of this backstory information that you can download and take a look at yourself on my Patreon page. And we'll see you again next time. But until then, try to stay dry and wrapped up. Sit in the cave, wait for the embers to die down. And once the storm passes, you can make your way into the actual steading of the Hill Giant Chief.